The House just approved over $1.2 trillion in government spending, and most people only saw the headline. Maybe you scrolled past it on social media. Maybe you caught a 30-second news segment that made it sound routine. Just another spending bill, just Congress doing what Congress does. But buried inside this vote were major funding decisions for healthcare, housing, transportation, and border enforcement. Decisions that will affect millions of Americans over the next several months. Decisions about which programs get protected, which agencies get expanded, and which controversial policies move forward despite public opposition. Plus, there was a controversial amendment that was meant to block funding for a rule some people fear could eventually allow the government to shut off your car remotely. A rule that sounds like science fiction, but is actually written into federal law right now. And that amendment? It failed. So today, let's break down what actually passed, what almost changed, and what this means for you. Because some of the most important parts of this vote barely got attention. The media focused on the top-line number and the political drama, but the details, the specifics of where this money is going and what it's funding, those details matter more than the headlines. On January 22, 2026, the House passed the final spending bills needed to keep the government funded through September 30th. This wasn't a last-minute scramble. It was the result of weeks of negotiations and backroom deals. Instead of one giant omnibus bill, lawmakers voted on two separate packages. One passed with broad bipartisan support. The other squeaked through narrowly and split Democrats right down the middle. Together, these packages total approximately $1.2 trillion in discretionary spending, separate from mandatory programs like Social Security and Medicare. This is what Congress has to actively appropriate each year. Now let's break down where that money actually went. The largest share by far went to the Pentagon, $839 billion, more than two-thirds of the entire package. That's more than the next 7 or 8 categories combined. This includes a 4.5% military pay raise for service members, funding for the F-35 fighter jet program, Navy shipbuilding contracts to counter China, missile defense systems including Israel's Iron Dome, and ongoing military operations worldwide. Supporters argue this is necessary for national security given rising threats from China and Russia. Critics, particularly progressive Democrats, point out the U.S. already spends more on defense than the next 10 countries combined and question whether every dollar actually makes Americans safer or just enriches defense contractors. But defense spending wasn't the most controversial part of this vote. Health, education, and labor programs received approximately $195 billion, supporting the National Institutes of Health, which got an increase for cancer and Alzheimer's research and pandemic preparedness. The CDC, which nearly faced deep cuts that would have eliminated programs and reduced emergency response capacity, those cuts were ultimately rejected. Mental health services across the country, opioid treatment and prevention programs, child care assistance for low-income families, and Pell Grants for college students. Crucially, this package rejected major cuts previously proposed for public health agencies, which helped the bill gain broader support. Transportation and housing received approximately $113 billion, covering FAA operations and air traffic control. Every safe flight depends on it. Highways and transit systems, Section 8, rental assistance for low-income families, public housing maintenance, and housing for older adults and people with disabilities. These programs stabilize housing markets and reduce homelessness. Only about 1 in 4 eligible households receives housing assistance due to funding limits, but the program survived. The DHS appropriations bill passed 220 to 207, one of the closest votes all year. Most Democrats voted against it because it kept ICE funding roughly flat. ICE has been under intense scrutiny after a fatal shooting of a U.S. citizen in Minneapolis sparked outrage and calls for accountability. Democratic leaders said the bill lacked strong accountability measures. Progressive Democrats wanted significant cuts and strict limits on detention. They didn't get those things. Republicans argued keeping DHS funded was necessary to avoid disrupting not just immigration enforcement, but cybersecurity, disaster response, and Coast Guard operations. They used the shutdown threat as leverage. Some moderate Democrats broke with their party to prevent a shutdown, while others who helped negotiate the deal still voted no to signal disagreement. The bill included $20 million for ICE body cameras to create accountability, reductions in enforcement funding compared to earlier drafts, and new reporting requirements. Republicans called it a reasonable compromise. Most Democrats said it didn't go far enough. Now let's talk about the amendment that went viral, the car kill switch. Representative Thomas Massie introduced an amendment to block funding for a vehicle safety rule in the 2021 Infrastructure Act, requiring standards for impaired driving prevention technology, sensors that could detect impairment and prevent vehicle operation. Supporters say this could save thousands of lives. Critics warn about false positives, who controls the technology, data privacy concerns, and how this capability could expand beyond drunk driving to enforce tickets or restrict travel. Massey's amendment to prohibit funding failed. The House didn't vote to create this power. It already exists in the 2021 law. They voted on whether to block funding for developing standards. They chose not to block it. The Department of Transportation can continue working on these standards. This debate is far from settled. A few other things barely got attention. The House repealed a law allowing certain senators to sue over January 6th phone record seizures. The package extended the National Flood Insurance Program, and Congress completed all 12 appropriations bills. None grabbed headlines. The Senate still has to approve this. If they don't, the government could shut down within days. This vote wasn't just about spending. It showed which programs Congress chose to protect and which to constrain. It showed divisions not just along party lines, but within parties. The DHS vote split Democrats significantly. It showed how controversial ideas survive when amendments fail. The car shutoff rule moves forward because the effort to defund it failed. That's how policy often gets made, through failed attempts to stop things. And it showed how much policy gets decided through funding rather than headlines. Most people will never read these spending bills, but the decisions in them will shape their lives for months. So what actually happened? The government stays open through September. Health and housing programs continue at roughly current levels. Defense spending rises to historic highs. ICE funding survives despite opposition. And debates over technology, privacy, and government authority remain unresolved. When you look at everything that passed and everything that almost changed, here's the question. Do you feel like this spending package reflects what everyday Americans need? Or does it feel like Washington is arguing over the same priorities, favoring defense over domestic programs, passing massive bills most people don't understand while financial pressure on American families keeps building? Because that's what matters. Not whether Congress avoided a shutdown this month, but whether their spending decisions actually improve people's lives or just maintain a status quo that isn't working for millions of Americans.